Hello, I'm Andrew Kame Deitch, and we're continuing our look at pre-modern Japan. Today we're going to be talking about court life in Heian Japan. So I've spent the last two sessions introducing the Heian period. I talked about the move to the capital and then what the court and administrative system was like, as well as some of the problems faced in the court. Today we're going to look at the life and culture lived by those courtiers. Now, during the Heian period, the court was, of course, the main political, economic, and cultural center of Japan, and the Heian aristocracy set new standards in literature, aesthetics, and religion that had a long-term impact on Japanese culture. The representative figure to think about here is Murasaki Shikibu, so let's take a look at her. Now, Murasaki Shikibu was a lady-in-waiting to Shoshi, who was the daughter of Fujiwara no Michinaga, who I introduced to you last time. She was also a consort of Ichijo Tenno's. Her major claim to fame was that she was an accomplished writer, most famous as the author of Genji Monogatari, or The Tale of Genji, a masterpiece of court fiction. Now, Murasaki Shikibu's real name is unknown. She was later called Murasaki after a character in the Genji itself, and Shikibu relates to her father's position as an official. So, a little bit about life at court. Courtiers managed the affairs of state, they ran the bureaucracy and the palace. Although they lived luxurious lives, they also had to work hard at their positions while struggling with each other to try and gain influence and power. Now, it's very important to point that out because we tend to have a kind of stereotype based on court fiction that these courtiers basically spend all their time doing art and poetry, and they aren't really doing very much aside from having this kind of luxurious life. Well, of course, that is a very important part of their lifestyle, but they had a 10-day week and they only had one day off at the end to sort of enjoy themselves and rest up and have their poetry contests and this sort of thing. Most of the time during the week, they're just doing the regular work of managing the government. So we have to keep that in mind. Women, I should point out, played vital roles at the time in linking families and exchanging information, as well as managing households. So certainly if you were a courtier who wanted to try and get inside information in some court intrigue, it was very important to have access to the woman, especially the ladies in waiting, who might have access to information behind the scenes. The culture of the court? Well, the Heian courtier families were literate and they valued cultural sophistication. They both practiced and patronized artistic pursuits. And these were very important because things like artistic pursuits and fashion and style all reflected one's family, and these could be important politically as well. They represented a form of cultural capital. So if you were known as someone with very good taste in art, or someone that patronized artistic families, if you were someone who dressed very well and had a very good sense of style, then this reflected very well on your family and would actually make people think that you were the sort of person who deserved to have a position of power. So for these reasons, we can say that cultural capital was a very important part of life at the court. So it wasn't just about wealth, it was also about things like culture and sophistication and education and good artistic taste. Now, this also meant that sometimes you couldn't draw a clear line between political or cultural concerns. So, for example, there were cultural rivalries as well as political rivalries, and these were often linked. Classic example would be the case of Murasaki, who I just mentioned, and her rival Sei Shonagon, another very influential writer around the same time. In fact, if we look at this schematic of the court at the time, we can see that we have Ichijo Tenno at the top, and then his two major consorts, Shoshi and Teishi. Each of these consorts was the daughter of a major Fujiwara figure. You can see Michinaga over here on the left and Fujiwara no Michitaka, his brother, on the right. And they, of course, had a rivalry. And Michinaga appointed Murasaki Shikibu to be the sort of tutor for his daughter Shoshi, to make sure that she had a sufficient level of sophistication and cultural taste to attract the attention of the Tenno. And at the same time, Michitaka and his nephew Korochika, he also recruited Sei Shonagon over here to be the tutor of Teishi. And so we have this rivalry between these two literature figures, Sei Shonagon here and Murasaki Shikibu over there, which was paralleling this political rivalry between these two major figures in the Fujiwara family. Murasaki Shikibu was not very fond of Sei Shonagon personally. She said Sei Shonagon is very arrogant. Those who want to behave as if they were superior to others will lower their reputation. Will their future be brighter? So this is just an example of the sort of rivalry that would go on in the court and how there are often cultural and political aspects to these. So let's talk a little bit more about literature. Poetry and prose both flourished in Chinese-style and Japanese-style forms. One of the developments that happened around this time was the popularization of kana. So this way of writing Japanese in a very simplified form where the characters have become simplified down into what we now recognize today. Now, there were a variety of literary conventions that are well studied among people who work on Heian literature. First of all, there was a great emphasis on poetic style, even in tales. So even if you were writing a romance story about the court, or a tale of adventure, or something like this, you would still have a great emphasis on poetry, and would probably incorporate many poems right into the text. There was also a great amount of wordplay and punning, seasonal and natural allusions, and classical allusions. So writers like Murasaki would expect that you would know all of the traditional Japanese and Chinese works that she would constantly drop reference to. This is a good example of some of the types of allusions that we're talking about. So here we have a poem from the Ise Monogatari. It runs, "I have a beloved wife, familiar as the skirt of a well-worn robe. And so this distant journeying fills my heart with grief." Now on the surface, this appears to be a very moving portrait of a man who is away from his wife and misses her because of his travels that take him away from the capital. However, on closer examination, we see that actually it contains a coded reference to Kakitsu Habata, an iris. So not only does the poem convey his feeling, but he also incorporates a flower reference to show what flower reminds him of his wife during his travels. So this, of course, would be something that would be expected, this type of play would be expected by those who read poems. So a little bit on literary genres. Well, poetry, first of all, very important, and there were a series of royal anthologies, such as the Waka anthology Koken Wakashu. There were also a series of tales. Now, tales, of course, monogatari were a broad category. There could be historical ones, fictional, travel accounts, and so forth. Taketori monogatari and, of course, the aforementioned Genji monogatari are good examples. There were diaries, religious writings, and also a category zuihitsu, which means sort of miscellaneous jottings, a collection of one's various reflections on things. And the best example of this is Sei Shonagon's own work, Makara no Shoshi. Now, the tale of Genji itself, Murasaki Shikibu's masterpiece, was a romance based on Heian-era court life at the start of the 11th century. And it tells us the story of Prince Hikaru Genji, and he represents a kind of image of the ideal courtier of the Heian period. He undertakes a frustrated search for love, and through his experience we also see many of the ups and downs of Heian court life. A few characteristics about the tale of Genji. Well, first of all is the sophisticated characterization. So Murasaki Shikibu avoids treating her characters as simple archetypes. They're very complex. They also have great psychological and emotional depth, both themselves in their own characters and also in their relationships with others. Finally, her work is known for its realistic depiction of people and court life, and therefore this represents a major primary source for understanding a lot of the lifestyle of Heian courtiers. So here we have images of a Genji Monogatari text, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. Now, Genji Monogatari's impact on Japanese culture has been immense. For centuries, right down to the present, it has inspired many of the stories and works of art. We see here, for example, popular manga series focused on the tale, and also commemorative money recognizing it. So it's shown up in many walks of life. Even young Japanese children who have never read a simple version of the tale are still familiar with the imagery associated with it. So it's one of the key ways that young Japanese are introduced to the splendor of the Heian court, and it continues to inform people's way of thinking about that. I want to talk a little bit now about artwork. Well, painting was a major form of artwork practiced by courtiers in the Heian period. What types of painting? Mandalas were one. Mandalas are a type of depiction of the Buddhist cosmos. So this is one type of artwork that was very common. Landscape painting, and natural scenes. Now, what mediums would they take? Well, we have folding screens were one popular media for portraying images, doors, scrolls, and so forth, especially imaki, so illustrated scrolls. Sculpture was another type of artwork, and this was primarily Buddhist, but not necessarily so. And finally, architecture. So shrines, temples, palaces, and residences were all types of things that required a lot of development of architecture at the time. And architecture in the Heian period showed an interesting synthesis of the older Japanese styles and also ongoing influence from China as well. Another thing that I want to discuss is aesthetic characteristics. Now, there was a great emphasis on nature in Heian literature and art. Often, natural elements were incorporated into designs. A key element of Heian aesthetics is the concept of miyabi. This refers to a feeling of refinement or elegance, and it's specifically the elegance of the capital in contrast to the unrefined countryside. So this is a type of beautiful elegance that is associated with the people of the Heian court. There's also emotional associations with colors and flowers. Flowers have particular meanings, and therefore, if a woman were to send a message to her lover and she enclosed a particular tree branch with it, the branch that she had picked and the flowers on it would indicate her feelings, and he would be expected to understand the message that she was trying to say. There was also great importance attached to fashion, design, and image. So this is an example of what a courtier residence would look like. So a series of interlocking kind of courtyards with long corridors. This, of course, would be the type of estate held by a very influential courtier family. And these are examples of the dress that would have been worn by a courtier and a lady in waiting, just to give you a sense of some of the fashion of the time. Women in particular put a great emphasis on the layers of clothing that they wore. They would wear a series of robes where one robe would always just show the edge of the one beneath it. So you could create a colorful cascade effect. And the types of effects they created would, of course, depend on the season as well. Buddhism was another important element of life in the Heian period. Of course, there were already the 6 Nara schools. This was a type of traditional Buddhism that continued to be focused on the state and elites. There was also the newer forms of Tendai and Shingon Buddhism. These had arrived in the early 9th century, and they put a greater focus on rituals and esoteric practices rather than on just study. And the Tendai were introduced by Saicho and were based at Mount Hiei, whereas Shingon, on the other hand, was introduced by Kukai and was based at Mount Koya. The last key point I want to draw attention to here is something called Mappo, the later age. And this is a belief that society was in an age of decline. So it was the concept that things were getting worse and worse and worse because people were more removed from the time of the Buddha and so had lost the ability to comprehend the Buddha's teaching. this also had a key role in encouraging the spread of Pure Land Buddhism, which was people offering faith in Amida Buddha to save them. So Mappo told people, well, this type of world has become so corrupted that we can't possibly save ourselves anymore. What do? Oh, well, don't worry, we can call upon Amida Buddha to come and save us. So this led to a major change in Buddhist thinking because it encouraged the spread of this more popular Pure Land Buddhism rather than the traditional forms. And we'll talk more about that in a future session as well. The Phoenix Hall of Byodo-in Temple in Uji is, of course, one of the most celebrated architectural remnants of the Heian period, but it's also important keeping in mind this idea of Mappo thinking and Amida that I just introduced, because it reflects the Heian idea of Amida's Western paradise. So this is how people felt the Western paradise was supposed to look. And the Western paradise, of course, was this beautiful, pure land where Amida would cause you to be reborn if you put your faith in him. And this, of course, the Byodo-in is very widely celebrated in Japanese society. It has, for example, shown up on the back of the 10-yen coin. So in conclusion, the Heian period was a time of flourishing cultural and artistic pursuits, and its literary, aesthetic, and religious achievements have echoed down through the ages, contributing to Japanese artistic and cultural sensibilities that continue to be influential even today. Thank you very much.